Hey guys, this is Vince Miller. I'm excited you're joining us today. Today we're in chapter 3 of our study through the book of 1 Peter. And honestly, the content of 1 Peter is so perfect for the challenges we're facing today as men. Today's topic is the strength of suffering. The strength of suffering. Now, before we dive in, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button below so you can get notified when new videos come out in this series. And I believe you want to be informed, so don't miss out. Also, head over to the website today. That is beresolute.org, beresolute.org. And while you're over there, sign up for the Men's Daily Devotional. I say this every time. Don't hesitate to do this. I write these devos that are short, sweet, to the point for men just like you. Every single day they're fresh. I promise you, and I think you'd really love it. Sign up today, hit that Men's Devo button, and subscribe. And with that, guys, let's dive into 1 Peter chapter 3, the strength of suffering. Now, fellas, as we dive in today, I really just want to begin with a single verse. And this verse is, well, it's shocking and stunning at the same time. But I think it really helps us to get after at least a lot of the content in 1 Peter chapter 3. And I want to focus on this verse today because I think it gives us a lot of context for what Peter was encountering in his time, but also where Peter had been in his life. Here's what Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 17. He says, "For it is better to suffer for doing good, if that should be God's will, than for doing evil." So let's back up for a little bit and recognize that there are two types of suffering, right? There's type 1 suffering, and type 1 suffering is suffering for doing wrong. Now, type 2 suffering is suffering for doing right. And suffering for doing wrong, well, is justified suffering, right? You do the crime, and you do the time. And we understand the purpose of suffering this way because, well, we easily see the connection between pain and its purpose. We see it. Others see it. It's justifiable. We even think when someone is punished for doing wrong that, well, he deserves it or he earned it, right? Now, the other type of suffering, what I'm calling type 2 suffering, is suffering for doing right. And this is a little different, because we often don't see the purpose in it or behind it. We do not see the connection between the pain and its purpose. And we feel it's not justified. For example, it's not right that my business is suffering, or that my family is sick, or my marriage is being torn apart, and that maybe media, politicians, and government leaders are inflaming all the issues and taking advantage of the narrative in an effort to control the public and causing chaos. There, I said it. Therefore, we don't like the pain. Not because we're unwilling to endure the pain, but that we don't see the purpose in it. We did nothing to deserve it, we think. But let's recognize these moments are going to happen in life because, well, sometimes life is not fair. We suffer pain at the hand of sin and unrighteousness, which means we're not always going to see what caused the pain, number one, and number two, the purpose in or behind the pain. Therefore, it's going to be hard to make a clear connection between the two, right? So let's take, for example, Peter, the guy who wrote the book that we're studying right now. I think we could come to the conclusion that during Jesus' life, Peter misunderstood what suffering was, just like we do. And I think from the ways that Peter interacted with Jesus that we could draw the conclusion that he thought following Jesus was going to result in less suffering, not more. I just want to look at a couple of quick interactions from them. They're very simple interactions. Both appear from the book of Matthew. The first one is from Matthew chapter 16, verses 21 through 23. Here's how it reads. It reads, "From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised." And Peter took him aside, he took Jesus aside, and began to rebuke him. Can you imagine that? Saying, "Far be it from you, Lord, this shall never happen to you." But he, Jesus, turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." How would you like the Lord and Savior of all mankind to say that to you? "Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." Now, based upon this one interaction, I think we could definitely conclude that Peter did not see the connection between pain and its purpose. Therefore, he misunderstood suffering for doing good, right? Jesus is suffering for doing good. Now, while that's us, me and you, we read this in context or inside of the cross, we can see the purpose in the pain. We have to remember, though, that Peter did not see that Christ's suffering was imminent and needed to happen and had a purpose to save the entire world from sin. But this is not the only situation. Second, we get to jump forward to Matthew chapter 26, verses 50 through 52. Listen to this interaction. Jesus said to Judas, "Friend, do what you came to do." And then they came and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. This is that moment where Jesus is going to be arrested in the final moments of his life. And behold, one of those who are with Jesus, that's Peter, stretched out his hand and drew a sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. The guy's name was Malchus. And Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword." Now, this moment happens again because Peter thinks he's being protective, right? He still has not made the connection between the pain and the purpose of the suffering. Therefore, he wants to protect Jesus from the suffering. But what he does not understand is that by being protective, which he thinks is righteous action, he actually is impeding the purpose of the suffering. And he's doing it by actually creating more suffering. And this is all because he just can't see the connection between the pain and the purpose and the suffering. And fellas, when we don't see the connection in the suffering, we behave poorly. We just do. And that's exactly what's happening in our world right now. We are behaving poorly because we don't see the purpose in all that's happening in the last year. And it's exhausting, isn't it? I mean, I'm exhausted by it. And so are you. Our country is fatigued. Business leaders are fatigued. Churches are fatigued. Men are fatigued. And we feel this way because there's no end in sight. And it's all because we don't see the connection between the purpose and the pain. And in life, we're not going to always be able to make this connection, but I know this, God sees the connection and he gets it. He sees and understands the connection, and he's using this season to teach us to trust him more. He is speaking to us and training us, like Peter, to stop being so soft, to be strong and learn how to suffer. Like Peter had to learn how to suffer. And I think Peter is passing on some good wisdom today to us. He's not teaching, he's teaching us how to suffer in the right way, not like he did, which was poorly before Jesus died, but rather to suffer like Jesus did when Jesus died. Now, there is one thing we can do when we don't see the purpose in the pain, right? When we can just do this one thing, we can continue to do good. Because in suffering, when we don't see the purpose in the pain, doing good takes one type of suffering off the table entirely, right? It removes suffering for doing wrong out of the equation completely. And I believe we as Christian men need to learn how to suffer for doing good again. And doing good only, alone. Not for doing wrong. In fact, I believe God may be teaching us right now as Christian men how to suffer for doing good, because we've been too passive to suffering for doing good for too long. Too long. We have taken advantage of a Christian life of ease and comfort. We've enjoyed too much ease and too much comfort in our relationship with Jesus Christ during our time. We have listened to his teaching without living his teachings. We have actively accepted his graces without living his grace. We have experienced his salvation without sharing his salvation. And I believe the church is experiencing a time of suffering that appears to be unexplainable, because God is cleansing his church of all unrighteousness. He is purging the church of doing wrong. He's purging the church of easy believism. And God is not only doing it with men in the church, but Christian leaders as well. Zacharias, McDonald, Noble, Hybels, Falwell Jr., and many more are being purged of unrighteousness. Fellas, look up. God is cleansing. We are relearning how to suffer by God's mass exposure of suffering for doing wrong. And in process, we're relearning how to suffer for doing good and being good. And I believe we better figure it out because the road to suffering is going to get harder. It's going to get harder. And if we don't learn it now, learning it later may be more challenging. So here's my actionable for you this week. If you've been doing wrong and you're suffering, accept it. Move through it. Expose it. Seek forgiveness from God and from others. This is your suffering and it's fair. But don't ignore it because it causes others to suffer too. Innocently suffer. Now, on the other hand, if you're suffering for doing good, accept it too. Continue to do good. Be righteous. Live righteous. Talk righteous. Act righteous, right? And get better at it because we need some men to lead the way, to show others who are lagging behind how to do it, how to suffer for doing good. I want you to listen to how Peter closes off part of this chapter. Here's what he says. It's so powerful. He says, "For whoever desires to love life and to see good days, let him keep his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous and his ears are open to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against the man who does unrighteousness." Fellas, this is your challenge. Accept it. Do good. Live good. And be good. Because God is purging men of all unrighteousness. I love you guys. Share this message with someone. Leave a comment below. It really helps us. Give us a thumbs up. We'll see you back here next time. Till then, be, live, and act resolute.